Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. As usual, I'm joined by my fellow panel members, Ms. Thuria Istefan and Mr. Ali Akbar.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today, we're going to hear evidence from Mr. Hamo Gregorian, who is the first of the witnesses we're going to hear from the British Board of Agrément. So my first task is just to check that Mr. Gregorian is with us and can see me and hear me clearly. Good morning, Mr. Gregorian. Are you there?
Good morning. Yes.
And you can hear me and see me all right?
Just fine. Yep.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Now, on the screen in front of you, you should have the words of an affirmation which you're going to make. Do you have them there?
Yep.
Good. Could I ask you to make the affirmation, please, by reading the words on the screen?
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Now, there are a couple of things we need to sort out before we start putting some questions to you. First, can you confirm, please, that you're alone in the room from which you're giving evidence?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Can you confirm that you don't have any documents or other materials with you?
None whatsoever, no.
Very good. And finally, could you confirm, please, that your mobile phone is in another room and that you don't have any other electronic device with you which is capable of receiving messages?
I confirm that, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I hope we shan't have any problems with sound or vision. You never quite know, of course. But if we do, we'll have a short break while the technical support team iron them out. All right?
Okay.
We shall have a break during the morning and the afternoon in any event, probably around about 11:15 during the morning and around about 3:15 in the afternoon. If you need any additional break at any time, will you just indicate that and we'll try and accommodate you?
Thank you.
Very good. Is there anything you would like to ask me or raise with me before you start answering questions?
I can't think of anything, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Well, in that case, I'm going to invite Mr. Millett to put some questions to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. Members of the panel, good morning. And Mr. Gregorian, good morning. And thank you for attending this public inquiry to give your evidence. We are very grateful to you. Before I start, could I just confirm that you can see me and hear me?
Yes.
If you have any difficulties in understanding any of the questions I'm going to ask you, or you'd like me to put the question in a different way or repeat the question, please tell me and I can do that. Can I also ask you please to keep your voice up so that the transcriber who is on this call can hear you? Can I also just advise you that if you nod or shake your head, that doesn't go onto the transcript. So you'll have to say yes or no, as the case may be. And if you feel you need a break at any time other than those that the chairman has indicated, please just say, and we can take a short further break.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we please start by looking at your witness statement at BBA 30s11096? Is that the first page of your witness statement that you see on the screen there?
Yes.
Now, you can see that it's dated the 29th of October 2020 at the top right-hand corner of the screen.
Yeah.
And it's 9 pages long. Can we go to page 9, please? You can see a signature there above the date and your printed name. Is that your signature?
It is indeed.
Have you read this witness statement recently?
Yes.
And can you confirm that the contents of this statement are true?
Yes.
Have you discussed your statement or your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
No.
Now, when you were working at the BBA, and we'll come to the dates shortly, you knew an entity called Alcoa, didn't you? Alcoa.
Yes, I have dealt with Alcoa.
Yes, and now we've been calling it Arconic in this inquiry because it had a change of name after your involvement. So I'm going to call it Arconic, so that you understand that when I use the word Arconic, I'm referring to Alcoa.
Okay.
Is that clear to you?
That's fine. Yeah.
I'm going to be asking you mainly about the initial assessment and the certification of Reynobond ACM cladding panels, which was certified by the BBA under certificate 08/4510, dated January 2008, which is the document we can see, and we don't need to go to it now, at BBA 6047. Now, looking back at the history, is it right that you were the project manager or product assessor who coordinated the assessment for the original issue of that BBA certificate in 2007?
That's correct, yes.
And the project was BBA number S3/41014. Do you remember that?
I believe that was the project number, yes.
And is it right that for that assessment, the BBA created a technical dossier or technical file?
Sorry, what was the question again?
For that assessment, the BBA created a technical dossier or technical file.
Yes, yes.
And I'll call the contents of that the technical file. And for reference purposes, for our records, it's BBA 408042.
Right.
Now, I'm going to start by asking you some questions about your background and your training. You were at the BBA, is this right, between 2004 and July 2010?
That's correct, yes.
And you retired from the BBA in July 2010. Does that mean you retired from your career, or you finished working at the BBA and went somewhere else?
I retired from my career. I retired, period.
Right. Okay. Now, can we look at your witness statement, please, at page 2 and look at paragraph 4 together? You set out your qualifications there, and we can see them on the screen. In paragraph 4C, you refer to the fact that you are a chartered engineer, MI Mech E. Is the MI Mech E, is that a reference to you being a chartered engineer in the Institution of Mechanical Engineers?
That's correct. A chartered engineer would be a member of an institution, one of which was Institution of Mechanical Engineers. And
Yes,
I was a member.
Yes, I see. And if we look at paragraph 5, you say, my working background has been primarily in the field of design within the construction industry. I worked for the BBA from January 2004 to July 2010 as project manager.
That's correct.
Is it right that you had a lengthy career in design and construction before joining the BBA?
Yes. I've had a lot of experience in design and assessment of structures, mainly relating to the construction industry, of course. I worked for Taylor Woodrow, as they were then, for about 12 years.
Right. And what were the dates during which you worked for Taylor Woodrow?
I think I worked 12 years, and I think I was made redundant from there because Taylor Woodrow started slimming down their operations. I think I was there from 90, late 1988, possibly to 2000, something like that.
Right. When you joined the BBA, did you join it as a project manager?
Yes.
And when you joined, did you have any experience from your previous work of cladding projects?
Not cladding such, no.
Okay. Now, did you have any experience of construction on the exterior of high-rise buildings at all?
I've dealt with structures, mainly steel structures, but I've done analysis work, mainly stress analysis work, variety of components, variety of structures.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. Can I ask you to look at your witness statement on page 3, please, paragraph 10? If we can just scroll down to that. You say in paragraph 10, at the top of the page, behavior in relation to fire is not my area of expertise, so compliance of the product with fire regulations would have been checked by a fire expert, e.g. BRE. Would you routinely ask a fire expert to check data on behavior in relation to fire?
Yes, in all projects, I seem to remember, we always consulted the fire expert.
And would you routinely ask a fire expert to check any statements that were made by the client about the fire data?
The statements would generally come from, as far as I remember, they would come from the fire expert.
Where a client made statements about what the data represented, would you ask a fire expert to check those statements?
I can't. I can't answer that, to be honest. I'm not sure whether they were informed before the certificate was issued, or I can't remember that. All I know is that the classification and so on came from a fire expert.
I see. So is it right then that conclusions about whether a product complied with, for example, the English and Welsh building regulations would come from a fire expert, not from you?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, I see.
I have no knowledge of fire.
Yes. Now, looking at the end of this paragraph, paragraph 10, you say, for example, e.g. BRE, was that compliance check for fire normally outsourced outside the BRE, outside the BBA, or was it ever done in-house by an in-house BBA fire expert?
I think with regard to this particular project, generally speaking, I would say BRE have got their own facility, and they would conduct tests to arrive at the classification. They would normally do that. In this case, again, I don't know whether the assessment was done without the test, or I can't remember that.
Yeah, my question was slightly different. My question was what would happen normally. When you checked compliance, or when compliance of a product with fire regulations was checked by a fire expert, would that fire expert normally be outside the BBA, such as the BRE, or would it be done by an expert in-house within the BBA?
I don't think we have a fire expert in BBA internally. So BRE would actually assess the product by fire expert.
I see. Was there any training on fire regulations and fire testing ever done in-house during your time at the BBA?
No, not that I can remember, no.
So when we're looking at going for fire expertise, would it normally be the BRE who would provide that expertise?
I think the report could come from BRE, but there's also other organizations which would come up with a report, and we would base our statement on that. And BRE was one of the experts we would consult to arrive at the fire performance.
Now, as at 2007, did you have any experience yourself of fire safety testing of products?
No.
Had you any familiarity with, for example, the British Standard 476 suite of tests?
I must have consulted during my employment, but I can't remember anything from it now. So I have no knowledge of, I don't know the details, how the test is done. So again, it's outside my area of expertise.
And would the same apply in relation to the European tests and classification regime?
Yes.
Were you aware, and I think it would follow that the answer is no, but let's see what you say. Were you aware that there was a difference between the UK testing regime, the British Standard 476 suite of tests on the one hand, and the European testing E13501 regime on the other?
I have no knowledge of fire issues, so I really wouldn't know the difference.
Going back to a question I asked you a moment ago, when you said you would go to the BRE as one of the experts that you would consult. Who generally was the individual at the BRE that you would normally consult on matters of fire safety and fire compliance?
If help was required, as in this case, I believe it was, that's what I would do. I would first of all approach my technical manager, who was Brian Haynes. Because of his long-standing relationship or association with the BRE, he's quite knowledgeable on fire issues, so I would probably consult him first.
Right, but when you went outside the BRE, which individual at the BRE would you consult when you went outside the BBA?
I think again, I can only concentrate on this particular project, and my contact with regard to this project was Sarah Colwell.
Yes, I see. Sarah Colwell on this project. Can you remember any names on other projects?
No.
In your time at the BBA, do you remember whether the BBA or the BBA's customers had a preference for using the British national standard, UK national standards for surface spread of flame, leading to class 0, or the European standards, or no preference?
I can't answer that, to be honest. As I said, I have no knowledge of fire at all. So I say any issues relating to fire, I would consult an expert if it was required.
I think in the light of the exchanges we've had so far, I think we can take the next few questions quite quickly. When you joined the BBA, did you have any knowledge at all of the building regulations?
With regard to fire, you mean?
Well, generally, number one.
Yes, of course. I mean, but not fire. I know very little with regard to fire safety issues.
Does that also mean that at the end of 2007, when you started discussing the content of the BBA certificate, then in draft with Arconic, that you had very little knowledge of the requirements of ADB? That's
correct.
Can we look at the technical file, please? BBA 408042, please, and look at page 19. This is on the technical file. If we go to page 129, this is section D, which has got the safety information in it at D, as you can see there.
Yeah.
But if we go to 129, we can see an extract from approved document B, namely section 12, construction of external walls. Does the fact that this document was on the technical file indicate that you would have had some familiarity with it at the time it was placed on the technical file?
We would include this just for the record, but I say I don't. I never had any details. I never went into details. It was just there as a record.
Who put this document on the technical file?
I think the project manager would normally compile a technical dossier.
And for this project, by which I mean the issue of the Arconic BBA certificate in January 2008. You were the project manager, were you?
Yes.
Yes. And so did you put this document on the technical file?
Yes, I must have done, yes.
Did anybody tell you to put this document on the technical file, or did you work out for yourself that it was relevant?
Yes, I decided it would have been relevant because it's to do with safety issues, fire safety issues.
Right. Was this the first time that you had encountered approved document B?
No, I think I may have come across it before, but I've only got a very limited knowledge of the approved document.
Can you remember, and I know it's difficult so many years ago, can you remember what it was that prompted you to think that section 12 of approved document B was relevant to the task you had?
To be honest, I can't. This is to do with cladding, and as far as I was concerned, it was relevant. Construction of external walls. So I think it was relevant.
Were you ever given any training specifically on the approved documents within the building regulations, or
No.
And specifically approved document B?
No.
Can we, and again, I think we could take this quite quickly, but just to put it in front of you, can we look at page 133, please? 133, still within the technical file. This is an extract from approved document B, known as diagram 40, as you can see, which is entitled Provisions for External Surfaces or Walls. And if you look at the diagrams at the bottom of the screen, you can see that there is letter D, any building, and letter E, any building. With letter D, you've got a boundary of less than 1,000 millimeters for a building of 18 meters or more in height, and E, same again, but this time 1,000 millimeters or more. And can you see that? But there are parts of this build, these two diagrams, which are shaded. Yes.
Yes.
And next to, so you've got one on the left, which is fully shaded, and the one on the right, letter E, which is partly shaded. Any dimension over 18 meters is the part that's shaded. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see under the rubric key to external wall surface classification, the second box down, which has the corresponding shading, says class 0 national class or class B S3 D2 or better European class. Were you familiar with diagram 40, this page of ADB, and specifically this part of it that I've just shown you?
All I knew in this regard was approved document B allowed the use of materials of limited combustibility to be used above 18 meters. That's all I know with regard to this. I may have looked at the details as shown here, but I can't remember. I mean, I never went into details because, as I say, this wasn't my area.
Right.
It was way outside my area of expertise, really.
Yes, I understand. And the reason I'm asking you is because
I know very little about the approved document, and that I do. It was within my knowledge. The 18-meter restriction was. I was aware of that.
I'm asking you because this page is on the technical file. Did you read this page when considering the BBA certificate in 2007?
Yes, I must have read this. Yes.
Did you understand what was meant or signified by the shaded area, class 0 national class or class B S3 D2 or better European class?
Again, I can only repeat what I've said.
I mean, did anything when you saw this give you pause to question it?
Yes, I really can't go into detail at this stage because I have very little knowledge of fire. All I know is limited materials of limited combustibility could be used above 18 meters. But as to whether the panels in question were of limited combustibility, that I would leave to the fire expert.
Yes,
I have very, at the moment, I can't. I mean, these details don't mean very much to me. But I know that at the time I was aware of this 18-meter restriction.
I understand. Let me just try two questions on you with the caveat you've given. The first is, you say you knew that there was a restriction above 18 meters, save in relation to materials of limited combustibility. Did you understand or think at the time that there was a difference between the concept of limited combustibility on the one hand and the concept of class 0, national class, or class B, S3, D2 or better European class on the other, that they were different ideas?
Again, I don't know the details. I've mentioned this before. The statement was given to me with regard to fire performance, and I just included in the certificate. Everything, all assessments relating to fire came from a fire expert, and I had no input in that at all.
Let me just try one more question on you, and forgive me. If you look at the bottom of diagram 40, you can see that there's a note. We can just go back to it. There's a note, note 1, which says the national classifications do not automatically equate with the equivalent European classifications. Therefore, products cannot typically assume a European class unless they have been tested accordingly. That note there, is that something that you noticed at the time, do you think?
Yes, I must have read it, and yes, I must have read it.
What did you understand by it? Do you remember?
The relationship between the European classification and the building regulations cannot be assumed to be the same. They cannot be assumed exactly the same. So so I'm just guessing that so let's say class 1 European might be different to class 0 in UK. So all I'm saying is that you can't. It's saying you're not. Well, it's exactly what it says. You can't exactly equate the European classifications to the UK. But other than that, I really don't know. I just don't. As I say, again, at the risk of repeating myself, fire was not within my area of expertise, so I just cannot. I must have read it at some stage, but as I say, all statements and fire performance assessments came from the fire expert.
Let's turn to your role then. You have confirmed that you are a project manager at the BBA.
That's correct.
As a project manager, am I right to understand that you don't necessarily have all the technical skills to make all the relevant assessments yourself?
That's correct.
And you would manage other people's input into the assessment. Is that right?
Correct.
Are there areas you would have the technical skills to assess yourself?
My main role within the BBA was I was assigned to the structural department, and I would just manage projects as normal by consulting various sections who would have the input into the draft certificate, which I would make a start on. And I also, as I say, I looked at the structural aspect. My area of expertise was in structures, strength of material structures. That I could make assessments. But on top of that, I would also offer any advice or technical support to any of the departments as required.
Now, I'd like to ask you some questions about the reporting lines at the time. In 2007, did you report to Jeff Gurney?
I believe so. I think somewhere around that time, I think the BBA was undergoing some organizational changes. So Jeff Gurney was my section head.
And who did he report to?
He reported to the technical manager, Brian Haynes.
He reported to Brian Haynes. Did Brian Haynes have any expertise in fire regulation? I think you mentioned earlier he did.
Yes, I wouldn't call him an expert within the BBA, but I think he's had a long association with BRE, and he's gained a lot of knowledge with regard to fire. So certainly he knew much more than I did.
And Jeff Gurney, did he have any fire expertise?
No. Perhaps more than me because of his longer service.
Did Brian Haynes have input generally to the technical work of the sections in relation specifically to fire?
I'm sure he would have. The draft certificate would circulate in a loop going between the various sections, and they would make a comment, and eventually the certificate would be looked at by Brian, and I'm sure he would have looked at the fire quite carefully.
Who was responsible for the technical sign-off of certificates which were issued as a result of your work?
In my case, the section head would sign. Again, as I say, bearing in mind there was an organizational change going on. I'm not sure if Jeff Gurney was our section head, but normally that's what would have happened. Section head would sign off, but only with respect to the particular discipline,
yes,
which was structures in my case.
And specifically at the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, who was the section head? Was that Jeff Gurney?
Again, I can't remember.
Did Brian Haynes, do you remember, check statements? Specifically asking you about 2007, early 2008. At that time, did Brian Haynes check statements made in BBA certificates about a product or a system's behavior in relation to fire?
Sorry, the question was, did
Brian Haynes check statements which were made in BBA certificates?
I'm sure that was his sort of main interest in actually in fire. So I'm sure he would have looked at fire aspects quite carefully.
And specifically in relation to the Renault 55 panel, did Brian Haynes in fact check the statements made about fire performance?
Yes.
In 2007, 2008?
Yes. Yes.
Can I then get back to the question we were looking at earlier about the BRE, and you've given us a little bit of information about that. Going back, if we can, to page 3 of your statement at paragraph 10. you've given the example of the BRE there at the end of paragraph 10 as an example of an external fire expert that the BBA would consult in relation to matters of fire safety. And you, I think, have also said that the BBA would also use other organisations. Did that include Warrington or Exova, Warrington Fire or Exova?
Yes, we might have consulted Warrington for some tests and so on. Yes.
To the best of your recollection, during your time at the BBA, did the BBA have any formal agreement or consultancy agreements with the BRE or with Warrington?
I never got involved in the contractual matters. I'm guessing there was a contract between the various parties.
You're guessing. Let me be a little bit more focused. Do you remember whether the BBA paid, for example, the BRE to check statements about fire performance on certificates?
Yes. Again, I'm not sure what the contractual agreement was, so I can't answer that, to be honest.
Okay. Again, focusing on paragraph 10, and you say compliance of the product with fire regulations would have been checked by a fire expert. Was that invariably the case? In other words, did the BRE or other external fire expert check every certificate issued by the BBA where performance in relation to fire was stated?
The report would come up with a classification of some sort, and we would include that within the body of the certificate.
When you say the report, which report?
The test reports.
Yes, and sorry, I'm not sure I perhaps made my question as clear. When you say in your statement, compliance of the product with fire regulations would have been checked by a fire expert, did the BRE check every certificate for fire performance? Every certificate the BBA issued?
I don't think that was the norm. I don't think that was the norm.
You don't think that it was the norm? So on what occasions would the BBA go to the BRE or other external fire expert for assistance?
In a case such as this, where there was a query, there was something to be clarified with regard to the coatings on the panels and so on. Whenever there was a problem, we would consult a fire expert like BRE.
I see. But do I take it from what you've told us that when you didn't think there was a problem, you wouldn't need to go to the BRE or other similar external expert?
I think we would generally, again, I can't remember all the projects I've been involved in, but generally the test report would give a classification and we would include a statement accordingly.
Can you give us some sort of idea about what sort of queries or need for clarification would arise, which would prompt you to go to the BRE, for example?
Yes, in this case, of course, we had to get some information from Alcoa or Arconic, and bearing in mind this was a confirmation certificate, we had to be absolutely sure as regards the fire performance. So just to make sure, we had to consult BRE.
Was there a particular problem that you perceived in the records leading up to the issue of the certificate, or what you saw on the technical file, which prompted
basically,
you?
I understand the actual color, for instance, has got a major bearing on the fire performance. So I needed clarification with regard to that, and of course, with regard to the back face of the panel. Again, because of my lack of familiarity with fire issues, I had to consult. I had to make sure that the right classification goes onto the certificate.
Yes. Now, let's turn to BBA certificates and types of them. You mentioned a moment ago that because this was a confirmation certificate, can I just understand what that is? Is it a certificate which confirms data which has come from another organization?
Not confirming data, but basically to check that the product put forward complies with the requirements of the UK building regulations. Of course, that just confirming that it's good enough to be put onto a cladding system.
And what would you confirm? Sorry, go ahead with your. I'm sorry, I overspoke. Do you want to continue?
Yeah,
your answer?
Basically to confirm that this particular product, which was assessed by a UEATC member. Do I need to expand on UEATC, or you're familiar with that?
Well, do tell us what you want
UEATC,
to tell us.
UEATC is a European technical approvals body, and certification bodies like BBA and the CSTB are members of it. And all assessment work by any of the certification bodies is acceptable, mutually acceptable to other certification bodies within the approval body. It's a European group of certification bodies.
Yes, and when you issue a certificate such as this one, are you confirming the fire safety, for example, against particular underlying data?
Again, fire, I cannot comment because I have very little knowledge of fire issues. But basically confirm that this particular product, for instance, met with the building regulations in this country. It's not confirming the data. It's confirming whether, based on the data, the product could meet our building regulations and standards.
And in order to make that confirmation, you would have to look at the data, wouldn't you?
Yes, indeed.
And would the data that you would normally look at to issue a confirmation certificate include test data or classification data, which had come from UATC bodies such as the CSTB in France?
Exactly, yes.
Yes, I see. Now, is it right that some certificates were leaders and some were followers, using the BBA parlance?
That's correct, yes.
And is it right that leaders would be submitted to a panel of experts to review, as well as to the certificate holder and others at the BBA?
Yes.
And am I right in thinking that the BBA certificate for Renault bond that was issued in January 2008 was both a confirmation certificate and a leader?
I think that was the case, yes.
Would a leader certificate require more attention and expertise to assess than a follower?
Not necessarily. It just depends on the complexity of the product, really.
Now, can I show you the certificate?
Oh, sorry, apologies for with the confirmation certificate, the time span was shorter. Instead of 9 months, which was the normal time given to a normal certificate, with confirmation it was shorter. So because all data were, for all intents and purposes, acceptable to BBA. So that's all I can say with regard to this particular type of certification.
Right. Well, then can you just explain as briefly as you can what the difference is or was between a leader certificate and a follower certificate?
If a similar product or a system was already given a BBA certificate, that would be a follower. If in the case of a leader certificate, it would have been the first time such a thing was being assessed. So in this case, I think this was a leader. Having said that, I think we had covered similar products. Bearing in mind, this is not a system we have assessed; it's a product. The panel was the product we were assessing.
And just to confirm something I think you said a moment ago, is it right, but just to be clear, that a leader certificate would have to be submitted to a panel of experts to review?
Yes.
And those would be outside the BBA, yes?
I think so, yes. Yes, from memory, I think that was the case.
Now, I'm going to show you the certificate. We'll come back to it in detail, but just to fix it in your memory, it's BBA 6047. If we could just have that up, please. This is the certificate in its final form, and you can see the number on the top right-hand corner of the screen, 08/4510.
Yep.
And product sheet 1, Reno Bond architecture wall cladding panels. And if you go down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there's a date of issue, and it's the 14th of January 2008. So that's the certificate. Just to be clear, do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
Yes, thank you. And that's the one you project managed when you were at the BBA.
That's correct.
Now, can we have a run up to that in chronological terms? And we'll start in 2004. Do you remember that Arconic first made an application to the BBA for assessment in March 2004?
I was never, I can't remember that.
Right. Can we go to BBA 408042, technical file, at page 627? This, at the bottom of the page, you'll see that there's an email from you to Claude Verlet on the 1st of June 2004, in which you say, "Dear Claude, I'm in the process of drawing up a contract for the subject. Please confirm whether the subframe to which the panel is attached is to be included in the assessment." Can we take it from that, Mr. Gregorian, that you read the application form in some detail at that stage?
Yes.
What was your role in drawing up a contract for the subject?
I think the project manager would draw up a contract, and with the approval of the section head, it would just go through. So I do recognize this particular email. Yes.
Would you read the technical file thoroughly in the process of drawing up a contract such as this?
The technical file was compiled after the project was completed.
I see. Let's move forward then to 2006, because we know that the BBA offered this contract, but it wasn't taken up. Do you remember that in 2006, Arconic again sent an application form to the BBA, materially identical to the application they made in 2004?
Again, I can't remember that.
But let's look at a document, MET 53158_P14, page 100, please. This, Mr. Gregorian, is an exhibit from Claude Verlet's exhibits to his witness statement of the inquiry. It's a letter which is sent by the BBA, as you can see, to Colin Southgate of Arconic, dated the 23rd of August 2006, and its title, Assessment of Renault Bond 55. You see that? If you go to the second paragraph, you can see that there was a fee, and although it's not very clear, the figure is £20,495. You see that?
Yes.
If you, do you recognize that document, do you think?
Yes, I remember having seen it, yes.
Well, let's look at what's attached to it, because there's an attachment. Can we go to page 102, please? This is an assessment specification, which was part of that document. And you can see at the top, it's got a new reference, S3/41014, and it's dated the 22nd of August 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking at it, do you think this was a document you drew up?
Yes, this is sort of standard format of offering a contract.
Yeah. And if you look under the items, under general.
Yes.
You can see number 1.1, it is 1.1, product name Renault Bond 55,
Mm-hmm.
and then product type, aluminium stroke polyethylene composite wall cladding system. And note the word system there. And then if we look at section 2.1, product range, it says composite panels, this is at the bottom of the screen, no, it's at the top of the screen, composite panels made up of a polyethylene core sandwiched between two pre-painted 0.5 millimeter thick aluminium sheets, 3 thicknesses, and it goes on to explain what those are and the sizes. And then below that, under ancillary items, it says Alcoa aluminium support rails or similar approved and fixing. Any subframing and its attachment to the substrate walls are outside the scope of this assessment, as are other miscellaneous construction details. Am I right in thinking that if this offer had been accepted by Arconic at the time, then it's this assessment specification that we've been looking at, which would define the final scope of the product certified?
I think at some stage we must have decided to approach this assessment differently, to approve just a panel on itself, by itself, rather than the whole system.
Well, you're yes, and I'm going to ask you in detail about that. But generally speaking, just on the face of it, would it be this assessment specification which would define the final scope of the product certified?
I really wouldn't. I can't comment because this was a contract which was offered, but I don't think we are under obligation to sort of stick to this particular detail. So we were at liberty, I think, to do the assessment in the way BBA would approach this assessment. I think we were at liberty to divert to some extent from the contract.
Yes.
From as it's stated here. But I'm quite sure it was the panel that was being assessed, and the certificate actually makes that clear.
When you look at 1.2, if we can just scroll back up, please, to the top of the screen, same page, but top of the screen, under paragraph 1.2, under product type, where you see that it says system, composite wall cladding system, what would be, or what was indicated by the word system there? You remember?
I think the intention was to draw attention that these composite wall panels would be used in a cladding system, but it's not meant to be an accurate definition of the product we were assessing.
Was it? Were you intending to capture simply the flat product, the panel itself, or the product as fabricated into cassette or rivet fix, or attached to a fixing system?
Our assessment was to ensure that the cladding material, this composite material, could be used in any cladding system, be it cassette or riveted. Our assessment stopped at the fixings. Anything beyond that would not be covered by the certificate. I think the certificate makes that clear.
Yes. Can I then ask you about the AVI techniques, if that's the right way of pronouncing it? Can we please go to page 173? I'm sorry. We want MET 30s 53158 underscore P13. Page 173. This is part of the application form sent to you by Mr. Verley in 2006. And you can see that this is a list of reports that supported the application at that time. And in the top two rows, you see it says AVI technique. Can you see that on the left-hand side there?
Yes.
And in the next cells, you can see that these were offered for structural and system for cassettes, structural and system for riveted. Did you see this document in 2006, do you think?
Yes.
What did AVI's technique, structural and system for cassettes and for riveted, mean to you at the time?
I think CSTB had a different approach with regard to assessment. They would assess different types of cladding system, cassette or riveted. They would assess the whole system. That's the impression I got. And obviously, when you ask for information, that's what they had, that's what they provided. But our job was to extract information with regard to the panel on its own from the document.
When you saw structural and system, did you think that included or excluded fire?
Sorry, with regard to fire?
Yes, when you saw AVI's technique, structural and system for both cassettes and rivet, did you think that that included or excluded an assessment for fire?
I'm only guessing for different fixing systems, they would have their own assessment in relation to fire.
Yes. Did you look, do you remember, at the CSTB AVI technique documents themselves that underlay this part of the application?
Yes, I must have seen the AVI technique, yes.
Yes. Can I just show you those then? Can we go back to Mr. Verley's exhibit part 14, MET 30s 53158 underscore P14, page 8. You can see this is technical opinion 2/04/1083. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can see, or look down a little bit, you can see it says Renabon cassette system. And if you go, and let's have it at the same time on the same screen, please, page 64 of the same exhibit run, please. We can see that this is technical assessment 2/04/1083, and this is 1081 on the right-hand side of the screen, got 1083 on the left, 1081 on the right, and this one is for the riveted system. When you looked at this application, did you notice that there were two different technical opinions from the CSTB, one for cassette system and one for riveted system?
Yes, but basically because their approach to assessment was different. They were assessing the system rather than just the panel on its own.
Yes, and did you notice? Did you read these? Do you think at the time?
So I think yes, I regularly remember this. Yes.
Yes, and as you say, there's nothing about these assessments, these technical assessments, about fire safety.
I suppose not.
When you say you suppose not, do you remember that? I mean, I don't want to read it all, not take them through. I think
with regard to fire, I think we were concentrating on the actual panel, and that's why we asked that test results be provided for us to assess the actual panel rather than the system.
When you say system, do you mean specifically as fabricated? As
I mean the panel and including the substructure.
Right. So that would be the panel as fabricated and the substructure.
And the substructure, yes. I think that's the we take the CSTB approach, but I think in this country the approach was different. We would just approve the actual panel and whether it was suitable to be incorporated in a cladding system.
Yes, but just to be very clear, when you say the panel and including the substructure, do you mean the panel as fabricated? In other words, as a rivet or as a cassette and the substructure?
Yes, yes.
You do. Now, can I then turn to the discussions that you had with Arconic starting in November 2006? And can we stay in this exhibit run, please, and go to page 114? This is an internal Arconic document, Mr. Gregorian, so you may not have seen it before, and you are unlikely to have seen it at the time. It's dated to the 2nd of November 2006, and you can see that it's a visit report created by Arconic and written by Colin Southgate, as you can see from the right-hand side of the document at the top. Location, Garston, Watford, UK. Were those the BBA offices at the time?
Yes.
And the date of the visit, 2nd of November 2006, and you can see who was present. We've got, for the BBA, we've got Bob Keys, John Albon, and you. You see that?
Yeah.
And on the other side, the Arconic people present were Colin Southgate and Andrew Rich. Yeah. Just pausing on the words next to your name there, ENG System Dept. Is that Engineering System Department?
Engineering System Department, yes.
Right. Do you remember this meeting at all? Late 2006.
I can't remember, to be honest. No.
All right.
Can't remember.
Let's look down at the document then and see how much of it you can help us with. If we go to item 1, you can see reason for visit. Exploratory call to access situation. I think that means assess situation as follows with C. Ver, that's Claude Verlet, in attendance. Well, do you remember whether Mr. Verlet attended in person or whether he attended by telephone?
I can't remember that.
Right. Can we go down to point 2, details of visit? It says, after a general discussion with BK and CS, threat to stop all dealings with BBA unless a satisfactory solution was found re both the above potential approvals. BK had arranged for the BBA persons responsible for each product to be in attendance. And then if we scroll down to page 115, please, we can see that there's a meeting B, and it says, meeting B, RB55 proposal dated 23rd of August 2006 with Hamo Gregorian. BBA confirmed that they would look at the original proposal and try to reduce the cost. They will use CSTB as details as basis of validation, that are concerned that UK building regs are more demanding than French regs. Also enclosed was fire regulation input. This will not be needed if BBA have latest certs from Warrington research covering PE cores. And then it says on the right-hand side, Claude Verla, stroke CS, we think that's Claude Schmidt, both of Arconic, to send full certs to BBA. Can you confirm what CSTB details means there when it says they will use CSTB details as a basis of validation?
Basically, the assessment done by CSTB leading to the AVI technique.
So that's a reference, is it, to the AVI technique documents that are
I think so, mainly, but they might provide other information as well.
Right. Is it right that the BBA was still looking for fire safety certification?
From this, obviously, fire was an important issue. And as I say, I can't remember the actual meeting, but we're just concentrating on the fire aspect.
Right. When it says they are concerned that UK building regs are more demanding than French regs, looking at the document, it looks as if that's a reference to the BBA having that concern. Do you remember whether that's right, that the BBA did have a concern at the time that UK building regulations were more demanding than French regulations?
At some stage, I must have consulted possibly Brian Haynes to make sure that that was the case.
And was that the case specifically in relation to fire?
Yes, especially on fire, yes.
Yes. Now, we'll come back to this document in just a moment. Do you recall a discussion at that time about reducing the cost of the assessment contract for Arconic?
I can't remember that.
Do you remember whether Arconic wanted to reduce the cost of the assessment by providing data rather than conducting more tests? Do you remember that?
No.
Going back to the document, just underneath where we were, it says, I have suggested, can you see in the middle of the screen, I have suggested that it could be better to validate the material RB rather than the whole system. This way, a cross-connection can be put together. And then it goes on below that, BBA certification for 4 millimeters thick times RB55 material, CSTB certification for RB plus systems. Then it goes on. This way, our two product materials, RLX and RB, I think that's Rhenolux and Rhenobond, can be approved on paper, which will cover most needs, such as the NHBC/NBS organization. Do you recall this discussion, or at least the gist of the discussion suggested by this note?
This was what I was referring to. I think the approach with CSTB and BBA were different in this respect. And I think we were trying to push this idea that the panel could be assessed separately from the rest of the system.
I see. So by whole system here, in that line, where it says it could be better to validate the material RB rather than the whole system, did that mean validating the material rather than the fabricated panel? In other words, cassette fixing system or rivet fixing system?
That's correct, yes.
See, and what was the so-called cross connection that was desired here that's referred to?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, I'm just asking you about that second sentence in that paragraph where it says, this way, a cross connection can be put together. What was that cross connection? Can you recall?
I can't remember that, no. I'm not sure what two products were, to be honest. No, I can't remember that.
A little bit earlier in your answers, you said that you think you were trying to push this idea that the panel could be assessed separately from the rest of the system. But when you say the panel as opposed to the system, can you just explain a little bit more what you mean about that difference? What was the panel and what was the system?
As I say, the approach the BBA adopted was to try and assess the panel on its own and whether it is suitable to be put on a system. So I think the BBA certificate actually makes it clear that the panel could be incorporated in a cladding system, which would have to be designed by a consulting engineer, let's say.
Yes.
So anything beyond the actual fixings was not covered by the certificate. It's probably a much safer approach than the covering the whole system.
When you say to try and assess the panel on its own, I just want to be as clear as I can here. Do you mean the raw panel before it's fabricated into a fixing system, rivet or cassette, or do you mean the fabricated panel?
The actual panel itself would have certain physical properties which could be used to design the fabricated panel. Does that answer your question?
Not really. When you're drawing this distinction between the panel and the system, I understand what you mean by system, but when you say panel, do you mean the panel before it's fabricated for fixing as rivet or cassette, or the panel as fabricated for rivet?
No, it could be just the panel as a material.
Right. Now, when we come back then to this document, this way a cross connection can be put together. What did that mean, do you think? Or do you remember?
Sorry, which paragraph is that?
It's the paragraph in the middle of the screen, which says, I've suggested that it could be better to validate the material RB rather than the whole system. This way a cross connection can be put together. What was the cross connection?
I think they must have referred to the two systems, and the cross connection would be the fact that it's just the panel being assessed. I'm guessing that's what this means.
Right.
The idea being is to stay away from the CSTB approach, which was covering the two types of system, and concentrate on the composite panel material itself.
I see. So when you refer to, when this says the material RB rather than the whole system, your understanding or your recollection was that this was a suggestion relating to the raw panel.
That's correct.
Rather than the fabricated panel.
That's correct.
As opposed to
yes.
Yes, I see. Now, just a question of going back to the assessment specification, which we saw earlier, which defined the scope as being the system, and you said, well, that could change. Would it be normal for such a change to be made, or would it be exceptional?
It's not very often we came across something like this, and to the best of my recollection, this is probably the first one I've ever come across. Normally, products or systems are quite straightforward, but this was slightly different.
You say it was the first one you'd ever come across. Did that raise any suspicions in your mind about what Arconic was trying to do?
No, I think I say the BBA approach was that it was much better to assess a product than the system.
And before we leave this document, two things. First of all, you can see that here it says, I have suggested, and that's an archonic person, has suggested that it could be better to validate the material RB rather than the whole system. You said earlier that it was you who were pushing, or the BBA who was pushing the idea that the panel could be assessed. Can you remember whose idea it was to have the panel, as you define it, assessed as opposed to the system?
I can't remember who it was who originated this, but I think the BBA policy was to somebody decided that it's much safer to approve a product than a system, because control over a system is a lot more difficult than control over the quality of a product, of a panel, for instance.
Did your understanding that the BBA was only certifying the raw panel as opposed to the fixing system, rivet or cassette, ever change between the date of this meeting, November 2006, and the date of the issue of the certificate in January 2008?
No, as far as I know, we were assessing the panel and its suitability for inclusion in a cladding system.
Can we then go to the bottom of this screen and the conclusion, according to this meeting note? And it says, very positive meeting and hard tactics may have helped our situation. RB proposal will be lower. Prepared to work with the CSTB data. AAPM, that's archonic, do need BBA for UK market. Can you help us with what is meant there by hard tactics? Let me ask the question this way. Did you detect that Arconic were driving a hard bargain with you?
No, I can't remember the details of this meeting at all.
Right.
Obviously, I mean, marketing were involved in this, and it must have emanated from marketing.
Yes, I see. Before I leave this note, can I just correct one thing? I said that CS stood for Claude Schmidt. In fact, it stands for Colin Southgate, just to correct that for the record. Do you remember that after this meeting, Bob Keys told you that you could reduce the technical time on the certificate?
That must have happened. I can't remember.
Let's look at the document, BBA 408042. That's the technical file, page 623. This is an email chain between you and Bob Keys at around this time. That's the technical file, BBA 408042. At page 623, yes, there it is. And if we see the bottom of the screen as an email from you to Bob Keys, 2nd of November,
yeah,
and you confirm to him that the technical time can be reduced to 120 hours. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I can't remember it, but that's what I must have said. The reason for that being a different approach to the assessment. And the fact that AVI Technique would provide all the information we need.
Yes. Do you remember that well, if we go to the top of the page, we'll see it. Top of the page, second email down, the new cost was, as you can see, £18,015. So that was a reduced cost, wasn't it?
I suppose, yes. Yeah, yes.
Yes. The cost reduction that was agreed and the reduction in technical hours that was agreed, was that as a result of the meeting on the 2nd of November 2006?
It must have been. Yes, I can't remember. It must have been.
Right. And was that reduction made because you could use the CSTB data for some of the aspects of the assessment?
That would be my guess, and Bob Keys would have agreed to that, I guess.
Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think we've run rather long, but that'll do, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry about that. You're quite right.
Mr. Gregorian, it's time we had a break. I'm sure you'd like one. We're going to stop now until 25 to 12, please.
Okay, thank you.
Ask you, please, while you're on the break, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it, all right?
No problem.
Thank you very much. We'll see you a bit later.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue hearing from Mr. Gregorian. I can see you there, Mr. Gregorian. Can you see me and hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Well, then, if you're ready, Mr. Millett, we'll carry on.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can we please go back to the note of the meeting at Watford on the 2nd of November 2006 at MET 30 53158 _ P14, page 114. I showed you this note before. If we just go to the top of the page, please, on the screen, and I showed you this as when we first looked at this note. It says that one of the people present was John Albon. Do you recall whether Mr. Albon was present throughout the entire meeting which you attended?
I can't remember, no.
Specifically, if we can go down, please, to page 115, the next page, you can see that there's meeting B, which we've just been examining in detail. Can you confirm, do you know, or do you remember whether Mr. Albon was present for meeting B?
I can't remember, no.
Moving forward in time, there was a further meeting with Arconic on the 7th of February 2007. That's in the same document run at page 131, where we will find, again, an Arconic internal visit report date of the 7th of February 2007. Now, again, this is not a document that you are likely to have seen before. You can see that the date of the visit in the title block at the top is, as I say, the 7th of February 2007. And in the header, you can see that it was a visit to the BBA at Garston in Watford. And you can see underneath the line who the people attending were. You've got Colin Southgate and Rich and Scheidecker as well. And then on the other side, you've got you, Hamo Gregorian, and also Bob Keys. Do you remember this meeting?
No, I don't.
If we look under the header Reynobond, please, at the second paragraph down, under that heading, it says the need of BBA certification is always more and more important. And then that's the first paragraph there. They say at the end of that paragraph, Alucobond is the only ACM supplier with this approval at the time being, but it will be a real differentiation point for the coming month. Do you remember that being said, or words to that effect being said?
I think the impression I got was that was generally the case, just talking to colleagues. BBA certification was very important to any prospective or potential certificate holder. So although I can't remember this particular incident, but I think it was generally accepted that the BBA certificate was very important to all manufacturers.
Was that for commercial reasons, marketing reasons?
I think so, yes.
And if we look under in the second paragraph, it says, if you read with me, it says the BBA agrees to make the certification on the product without to be linked to a specific system. Possible fixing system will be simply mentioned in the certification. It means we will have only one approval for all our application instead of to make one approval per system. If people will ask for more details, we will use the CSTB specific approvals. Initially, quotation was on £24,000, but after negotiations, CSO obtained to have it for £16,500. Action sent our French building approvals in English, sent our documents of our CST BAT approval and technical literature. And then if you look at the bottom of the action list, confirm the assessment specification, which be certified, also FR query. Now, do I take it that you have no independent recollection of this meeting?
I can't remember this meeting.
No. All right, but let's see how we go with the document. Looking at that second paragraph I've just read out to you, where it says the BBA agrees to make the certification on the product without to be linked to a specific system. Did that mean, do you remember at all, that you agreed to certify the panel as the product, regardless of what fixing system was used to put it on the wall?
That's right. I must have discussed it with the marketing people and most probably with Brian Haynes as well.
Now, at this
that was the approach that we would normally take in a case like this. Instead of the system, we would approve the material, whether it was suitable for inclusion in a cladding system.
Yes. Now, at this time, were you aware, do you remember, that RB55 could be applied in either rivet fix or cassette fix?
Again, bearing in mind it was the material we were assessing, it would have been suitable for both systems.
Yes, suitable for both, certainly. But were you aware that to be used at all, Rainabon 55 had to be fabricated into a fixing system, either rivet or cassette?
That's correct, yes.
And indeed, do you accept that you had seen that fact from the CSTB AVI technique approvals that were on the file for the 2006 application?
Yes.
Yes. Did you realize that, in fact, the panel itself in its raw form was unusable unless it was fabricated?
Well, the fact that the material was suitable for fabrication, we would consider. We would make sure that it could be fabricated for installation in the cladding system.
That wasn't quite my question. Let me try it again. Were you aware, did you realize that the panel itself in its raw form couldn't be used at all unless it was fabricated into one or other of those two fixing systems?
You mean at this stage?
Yeah.
That was the whole purpose of the assessment, to make sure that it could be, based on the AVI technique and the CSTB data, that it could be fabricated.
When you say it could be fabricated, are you saying that the purpose of the certification by the BBA was to cover the fabricated product, fabricated as a rivet fix or a cassette fix?
The BBA certificate would cover the suitability of the material for fabrication, which would be used in a cladding system.
Right.
That is the whole purpose of the BBA certificate, to make sure that whether that material was suitable to be fabricated and put in a cladding system.
Yes. Can we agree that the BBA was, or the BBA's purpose was to certify the panel whether it was used in a rivet system or a cassette system?
That's correct, yes.
Why did the BBA agree to do that?
It's a much safer way of certification than, and obviously cheaper. In this case, it's a simpler assessment. So I think it's appropriate to do that. And that was the BBA approach. If you include the cladding system right back to the brickwork, for instance, there's too many unknowns which you have to take care of. And we try to stay away from that.
Just to be clear again, I want to make sure that we're not at cross purposes. There are three concepts. There's what I would call the raw panel, ignoring the fixing, ignoring the fabrication into a fixing. There's the fabricated panel, which is fabricated for a particular fixing, rivet or cassette, and there's the system into which you put the fabricated panel. Do you understand what I mean by those three separate concepts?
Yes.
Yes. So my question was whether the BBA was agreeing to certify the raw panel, regardless of whether it was fabricated into a rivet or cassette.
The BBA assessment was to make sure that the raw panel material was suitable, whether it be rivet fixed or cassette fixed. That was immaterial as far as the BBA certificate was concerned. We just concentrated on the suitability of this material to be fabricated and put in a cladding system.
Did you have any thoughts at the time about what Arconic's rationale for having you certify the raw panel, as I would call it, was?
To my recollection, there was no objection to that, but they had a different approach to assessment of these panels and to what BBA did.
What was their approach?
Their approach was to approve each cladding system on its own, rivet, and as far as I remember, they would approve the whole system, cladding system, riveted or cassette.
What was the purpose of simply mentioning the possible fixing systems in the certification if all that you were certifying was the raw panel?
The drawings that were included were just to draw attention to the fact that the panels, the main use of the panels were to be included in a cladding system.
Why was that relevant to your certificate?
But as I say, the intention was to make sure it was suitable. The product was suitable to be included in a cladding system. But I think we make it clear the BBA made it clear that it's the panel that's the object of the assessment.
Well, we'll come back to this topic later when we look at the certificate itself, Mr. Gregorian. But can I ask you whether you remember any discussion of why they wanted approval for both fixing types?
Sorry, but why the CSTB wanted?
Yes. No, why the client, Arconic, wanted it?
I guess that's where that's in compliance with the AVI technique.
I see.
That's probably why they had the AVI technique before the BBA certificate. So I suppose that's why they were asking for that.
When you look at the paragraph that we've been looking at, you see 4 lines down. If we can have the document back on the screen, please. It says, if people will ask for more details. Can you see it says 4 lines down in that paragraph, if people will ask for more details, we will use the CSTB specific approvals. What did you understand, doing the best you can with your recollection, what CSTB specific approvals were?
Sorry, I can't quite locate the line you were referring to.
Okay, it's under the big Renault title, second paragraph or second block of text under that, and 4 lines down, it says, if people will ask for more details, we will use the CSTB specific approvals. Do you remember what those CSTB specific approvals were?
I can't remember, no.
Specifically, what I'm really trying to get at was whether that was a reference to the AVI technique approvals, which didn't deal with fire, so far as we can see, or whether that's a reference to CSTB fire tests.
Yes, I think the intention there is to try and use the AVI technique as much as possible for our purposes, for our assessment.
Yes. And do you know, looking at the line above, it says it means we will only have one approval for all our application instead of to make one approval per system. Do you know, can you remember what Arconic's rationale for only wanting one approval instead of one approval per system?
I can't comment on that, to be honest.
Can I suggest something to you and see if you can comment? Was it because it would be cheaper for Arconic to have one approval for all the applications as opposed to?
I'm guessing, yes, that might have been one of the considerations.
Right, but you don't know. You're guessing. Is that your?
No, I can't comment on that.
Fair enough. Now, we saw from the 2006 file, as I mentioned a moment ago, that the BBA had on its file the CTSB AVI technique approvals, didn't it?
Yes.
And do you remember I showed you these? They were two separate ones, one for cassette and one for rivet, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Why wouldn't it have made sense for the BBA to make its own assessment on each fabricated system? In other words, a BBA assessment on rivet and a BBA assessment on cassette, in the same way that the CSTB had done.
As I say, BBA philosophy was, I think, from engineering standpoint, probably more sensible because the variables in a system are much more complicated than just approving a panel for suitability. So we adopted that approach for assessment of this particular product.
Could the BBA have insisted on looking at assessing cassette and rivet separately in the same way that the CSTB had done under the ABI technique approach?
No, as I say, I thought from quality control point of view, it was a much more sensible approach to assess the product rather than the system.
Right. Who would have made the final decision to assess just the product, as you call it, or the raw panel, as I call it, as opposed to the fabricated version?
I can't remember. This must have been discussed among several parties.
Now, we move forward a month to March 2007. After this meeting, do you remember that Arconic sent another application form at the end of February 2007? Do you remember that?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Yes, do you remember that after this meeting, Arconic sent another application form for a contract?
I can't remember that.
Well, let's skip ahead. Can we go to page 1 of the technical file, BBA 408042, page 1. This is the certificate contract, as you can see there. And there's a reference on it, S3. If you look at the top right-hand corner,
yep.
S3/41014, and it still bears the date 22nd of August 2006. Can you just confirm that in fact was the original date of the 2006 application? It just hasn't been changed in this document.
Yeah.
Now, we can see that there's a price, if you look a little bit down, further down the page, under item Roman 5, the fee, it's £16,527 and no VAT. And if we turn up a little bit, up the screen to item Roman 2, you can see the subject and proprietary name, Renault Bond architecture. Somebody's written architecture in manuscript. And then underneath that, nature of product or process, aluminium, polyethylene, composite wall cladding, system was typed, but then that's been deleted in manuscript and somebody has written in hand panels. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you know who wrote that? Who
No,
made the...
I can't remember who wrote that, but
Right.
Obviously at some stage we have decided that this is a better approach, and the contract was changed accordingly.
I see. Does that change reflect the agreement or arrangement arrived at in Watford in the meeting earlier in February 2007 that we've been discussing?
It must have been as a result of that, I suppose. I can't comment on that.
Right. Now, we know, as I've shown you, the certificate that was eventually issued in January 2008. I want to look a little bit more closely at the assessment that led to that certificate. Can we turn on in the technical file, please, to page 11? This is the assessment program sheet. If one looks at the top left-hand side of the screen, you can see that. And the product name there is Rainobond 55 wall cladding system, as you can see in the middle of the page. And again, it still bears the date of 22nd of August 2006. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Did you prepare it?
I think so, yes.
Looking at the date of this document, and I know it says August 2006, would you have prepared it for the initial contract pricing?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Right. Can we just be clear? Do you think you might have prepared this at the same time as preparing the offer for the contract in 2006 and then just not updated it when it came to finalizing the contract in 2007?
Yes, I suppose. Yes, yes.
I don't want to lead you into error by suggesting that, but we're trying to work out the dates.
Yes, it clearly says cladding system, but obviously the contract has been changed, and so has the pricing, and the number of hours, I think, must have been changed as well accordingly.
Yes, I see. Can we then just be clear whether, even though there was that change from system to panels that we've discussed, you would still have followed the assessment program set out in this document when doing your assessment for the certificate that was ultimately issued?
As soon as it was established that we were assessing the cladding panels, I would assess the product accordingly.
Right. Let's look at item 4.1, about a third of the way down the screen, safety, and then under assessment / test work, it says strength and stability, behavior under wind loads, resistance to hard and soft body impacts, behavior under thermal action, and then fire, behavior under fire. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if you look at the columns to the right of that, we can see that the assessment for strength and stability is 25 hours, assess CSTB data. You see that? But for fire, it's 5 hours, consult BMH. And why would more hours be needed to be devoted to strength and stability rather than fire?
That's my area of expertise generally, and there's a lot of details to look at. So bearing in mind this is an estimate of hours, it's not meant to be there's no way you can estimate these things accurately. And CSTB data, again, that presents a challenge as well. So I think 25 hours was sort of sensible.
Why would more hours be given to strength and stability rather than fire?
There's quite a few things you need to check when it comes to, I mean, I would, by calculation or analysis, I would have to confirm that the product was good enough for wind load and so on in the UK.
Would the same degree of care and analysis not be required to confirm whether the product was good enough for fire in the UK?
With fire, it's just a matter of looking at test data and checking against compliance with our building regulations. So there's no, as far as I know, there's no analytical method to confirm one way or the other.
But you do, I think, accept that you would need to look at the test data?
Yes, of course, yes.
Who would decide how many hours would be required for each of these safety elements?
I think I would probably consult with my section head, and bearing in mind he had a lot more experience than I, we would come up with you can see the hours go in steps of 5, so it's not meant to be very accurate at all. It's just an estimate.
In the far right column, we can see the steps, and for strength and stability, it says assess CSTB data. Is that referring to the CSTB AVI technique documents we saw on the technical file?
Yes, some information would have come from AVI technique.
Yes, I see. And for fire, as we've seen, it says consult BMH. Is that Brian Haynes?
Yes.
Why did it say consult Brian Haynes?
Well, because of the issue regarding the perhaps lack of information that we had in the CSTB documents.
Right.
Rather, basically, because I wasn't sure how to assess fire aspect, I had to consult Brian Haynes.
What precise question or query led you to think that you needed Brian Haynes's input?
As I say, Brian was my main port of call with regard to assessment of fire, and just to confirm that the material with the appropriate coating was suitable. So I had to confirm that with Brian. There was no way I could assess it myself. So I had to consult Brian.
Did you know yourself what test data or classifications you were looking for in order to be able to assess this product for fire safety?
No.
I see. So would it follow from that even in respect of that question, you would have to consult Brian Haynes?
Exactly. Yes.
I see. Did you consult Brian Haynes as a matter of fact?
I did. I referred the matter to Brian, who then consulted BRE for their advice.
Do you know what he did? Do you know what Brian Haynes did?
I remember, strangely enough, I remember the conversation he had with Sarah Colwell. Because I didn't get a response from Sarah in writing, I asked Brian to contact her. And as I say, because of his long association with BRE, he was advised that as to the classification of this material. And we included the appropriate statement in the certificate.
Were you party to that conversation?
I actually, yes, I was, strangely enough, I do remember being in the room while he was talking to Sarah.
Was there a meeting?
It wasn't a meeting. He was talking on the telephone. I remember that. And soon after that, he signed off the certificate.
Right. Can I just see if we can explore this a little bit more? First of all, when was the conversation between Brian Haynes and Sarah Colwell?
After I must have after I talked to Brian, I think and I mentioned the fact that I'm not getting a response from BRE. He immediately got on the phone and spoke to Sarah. That's my recollection.
So in terms of timing, you said earlier that it was soon after the conversation that he signed off the certificate. That was January 2008. By reference to that, when do you think this conversation took place?
I can't remember.
Right. Now, you say you were in the same room as Brian Haynes, and he telephoned Sarah Colwell. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Could you hear both sides of the conversation, or only Brian Haynes?
No, just Brian.
I see.
It wasn't a long conversation, but Brian was advised that as to the suitability of the this particular material for fire performance.
Right. Do you know whether Sarah Colwell had in front of her the draft certificate or any test data relating to fire for Renebon 55?
No, I wouldn't know that. Obviously, we must have supplied some information with regard to the product.
Forgive my interrupting, Mr. Millett. Mr. Gregorian, just help me with this. You said a moment ago that you couldn't get any response from BRE. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
I took it from that you had contacted BRE yourself to ask for their assistance. Again,
That's
is that
correct? Yes.
Would I be right in assuming that you sent some form of information to the BRE in order to obtain their assistance?
Exactly. Yes.
Can you tell us what it was, please?
Documents, appropriate documents, maybe test data, and so on. Anything to do with anything that was necessary to make a fire assessment. I can't tell you exactly what it was, but it was all the information that Sarah would need to make an assessment.
Now, some of that information was presumably going to was test reports, is it, or?
Yes, I'm sure. Yes, there must have been some test reports.
Right. Can you remember in what form you sent them or how you sent them?
Most probably by email.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes.
Carry on. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to come to some of that later on, I think, when we'll explore the precise documents in a bit of detail. Can I just understand, this conversation, did Mr. Haynes report to you what Sarah Colwell had told him after the conversation had ended?
He didn't. He just basically he just approved, or rather checked and okayed the particular statement relating to fire.
Yes, I see.
I have no details as to what conversation went on. I have no idea. All I know is that I distinctly remember him talking to Sarah.
And to be clear, am I right in thinking that the data in the CSTB AVI technique documents were not considered at all, to the best of your knowledge, either by Sarah Colwell or Brian Haynes, in relation to any claim about the fire performance of Renebon 55?
I think it would be safe to assume that there was not enough information in the AVI technique. That's probably why we had to check with fire experts.
Yes. Now, just covering this off, can we go to your witness statement, please, at page 4? I just want to look at something you say in your statement at paragraph 5D. You say, in response to the question, in particular, what consideration the BBA gave to Little Roman 1, the fire performance information therein. Your response is at paragraph 20, and you say, fire safety is a specialist area. It would have been normal for an internal or external fire expert to confirm compliance with UK building regulations. The statement in the certificate would have been based on the advice given by the fire expert. And am I right in thinking that on this occasion, in relation to this certificate, ultimately that was Sarah Colwell? That fire expert was Sarah Colwell.
Yes, I think it's yes. Yes, through Brian. Our assessment of fire would have come from a fire expert, and in this case, it was Sarah Colwell.
Yes. Now you say through Brian. Did Brian Haynes himself perform any assessment on the fire safety of Renebon 55 with Sarah Colwell's help?
No, I think he must have been advised by Sarah based on what Sarah had in front of her as regards test data and so on.
You say that the statement in the certificate would have been based on the advice given by the fire expert. Did Brian Haynes actually word those statements for the certificate, or did the wording come from Sarah Colwell?
No, the wording didn't come from Sarah Colwell. We put the wording in, and if the classification was in accordance with what the fire expert had advised, Brian would okay it. He would sign it off.
Do you remember whether Brian Haynes checked his wording with Sarah Colwell after he had put it in the certificate, but before it was signed off?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, as I say, all Brian would want to know was whether this particular material classification is what the statement says.
I see. So just to be as clear as we can, on fire safety, can we take it that the precise language of the wording of the certificate was Brian Haynes's, based on what he had understood the advice from Sarah Colwell was?
The statement wasn't Brian Haynes's in entirety.
No, in relation to
these
fire.
These statements are quite standard format in BBA certificates. So where a classification was involved, he would most probably check that the classification was compliant with building regulations. But the wording didn't come from Brian.
Well, we'll come to the certificate shortly. I'm just trying to get an understanding of the role Sarah Colwell played in the precise wording of the certificate. In relation to matters of fire safety, was it Brian Haynes who actually drafted the language based on what he understood from Sarah Colwell's advice?
The draft would most probably have come from a similar certificate, and as I say, the standard format that we use. Brian would have checked that the statement was correct, and he would have. I was most probably with him when he actually signed off the certificate.
Yes, but now, were you responsible for drafting the technical content other than fire and selecting the diagrams and images in the certificate?
Yes, I normally would decide what goes on the certificate.
And did the BBA have stock phrases or generic statements that could be slotted in, used from other certificates?
Yes. So that was common procedure.
It's common procedure. And who decides whether it's appropriate to copy across phrases from other certificates? Would that be you, or would that be Brian Haynes when it came to fire safety?
I would draft a certificate based on a similar product, for instance, just to make sure that I would try and make sure they were relevant, and then circulated within the different sections.
Well, let's turn to the certificate in detail now. Can we go to BBA 6047? I showed you this earlier on in your examination, but we now need to look at the detail. On the first page, you can see that there's a dark blue header, as I showed you. Product sheet 1, Renault Bond architecture wall cladding panels. And then you can see underneath product scope and summary of certificate, it says the certificate of confirmation relates to Renault Bond architecture wall cladding panels, aluminium polyethylene composite panels used to provide a decorative stroke protective facade over the external walls of buildings. And then there's an image on that right-hand side. First question is, was that title, Renault Bond architecture wall cladding panels, chosen to indicate that it was certifying the product? In other words, the panels.
It was just the picture would be supplied by the certificate holder. And the intention there is to make sure that the cladding material could be used in a cladding system such as this. There's no other way that you can depict a panel. A panel wouldn't make any sense. So unless you put a picture in there, you wouldn't know what the function of it was.
We'll come back to this page shortly, but can we go to page 3, please? And at the top there, you'll see in the blue band, the dark blue band, the word general, and under it, you see it says this. This certificate relates to Reynolds Bond architecture wall cladding panels comprising an aluminium/polyethylene composite material fixed to an aluminium subframe to provide a decorative/protective rain screen facade over the external walls of buildings, as we saw on the front. And then it says the subframe and its attachment to the substrate wall are outside the scope of this certificate, as are other miscellaneous construction details. Does that mean the metal rails that the cladding is fixed to?
That's correct, yes. It's not covered by the certificate, that's correct.
Yes. And what about other elements of the facade build-up, such as the insulation and the cavity barriers? They're presumably
no, they're not covered at all.
Outside, no. Now, if you go down to the next blue header, technical specification, you can see description. And underneath that, it says 1.1, the Reynolds Bond architecture wall cladding panels comprise two 0.5mm thick aluminium alloy sheets. And then there's a specification there. Bonded to either side of a core of low-density polyethylene, LDPE. The panels are available either plain-edged, riveted system, or flanged, cassette system, to suit architectural requirements, see Figure 1. A Duraglass or PVDF coating available in various colors protects the exposed face. A polyester primer protects the unexposed face. The products are also available in a fire-retardant grade, FR. If we skip down to subsection 1.4, it says this, if you just read with me. Plain edge panels are riveted directly to the aluminium subframe. Flanged panels are hung from the subframe using T-slots fitting onto pintle on the subframe. It says flange widths can vary to suit the design requirements, see Figure 1. And there's a little footnote, as you can see underneath that, which relates to the word subframe. And again, it says not covered by this certificate. Now, the Figure 1 that's referred to there is apparent if you look a little bit lower down the same page. If we can scroll down to Figure 1, have that fully on the screen, you can see that it says Figure 1, Reynolds Bond architecture panels and typical fixing systems. And there within Figure 1, you can see two systems. You've got on the left, riveted system, and on the right, cassette system. Do you remember where those diagrams came from?
They must have come from the CSTB documents.
So not from Arconic, is that right?
They might have come from Arconic, but normally I would imagine CSTB would include some details of this nature in their certificate.
Do you recall how Figure 1 came to be on this certificate?
It was considered appropriate to include these just to show what can be done with this cladding material, with this panel material.
Was it you who decided that Figure 1 should be inserted in this certificate? It
is quite normal, accepted practice within BBA to include some details, construction details of this nature.
Well, it's a bit more, isn't it, than showing what can be done with this cladding material. isn't the certificate telling the reader that the panels are whether riveted or cassette are covered by the certificate?
I think we do make it clear that that any substructure would not be covered, or installation or any fixings would not be covered. This is just to show how the material could be used in a cladding system.
Well, you say that. Let's just go back to 1.4. You could see the footnote. Sorry, yes, it's the footnote 1 there, not covered by this certificate. And that relates, doesn't it, to the subframe. And that's consistent with the exclusion of the metal subframe on the front of the certificate. Yes?
Yeah.
So what this certificate is clearly excluding, is this right, is the subframe.
That's correct. Anything to do with the fixing to the subframe and the subframe to the brickwork substructure is irrelevant. But these are just details to show how the material could be used in a cladding system.
Yes, anything to do with the fixing to the subframe and the subframe to the brickwork, the substructure, you say would be irrelevant. What I'm suggesting to you is not excluded is the form of fabrication. In other words, the panel as fabricated in rivet and as fabricated in cassette is included.
The dimensions of the panels would be decided by design, by a suitably qualified engineer. So it could be any dimension, providing it satisfies resistance, for instance, to wind load or impact load. There's so many structural considerations. So a structural engineer could design this material to span between the metal rails, for instance, depending on the wind load. If the wind loading, the design wind load is too high, obviously the metal rails will be closer to each other.
Did you draft paragraph or section 1.1 and section 1.4?
Sorry, I can't see the 1.1.
So yes, can we just scroll up, please, to there? 1.1 and 1.4 are now visible on the screen, I think, Mr. Gregorian, for you. Do you remember whether you drafted those parts of this certificate?
That would have been based on the contract.
Right, based on the contract.
Yes.
But was it you? I'm asking whether
yes,
it was.
Yes, I must have done that. Yes.
Can we go to your statement, please, at page 4? And I'd like to go back to where we were, which was the question D, in particular, what consideration the BBA gave to, and you've seen Little Roman 1. I'd like to go to Little Roman 2. The question is what consideration the BBA gave to the fact that CSTB issued separate certificates for cassette and for face-fixed riveted fixings. And your answer there is, in normal operation, both types were considered suitable for incorporation in a cladding system. For behavior in relation to fire, consideration would have been by a fire expert. See answer to D1 above. If you look at the bottom of the page, I just want to look at question 7. Question 7, what products did certificate 08/4510 cover? In particular, please address the variants. A, core type, standard PE or FR. And then over the page, looking at little b, which is what I want to focus on, fixing method, face-fixed riveted or cassette. And your answer is both. And looking at that answer there, can I take it from that as far as you were concerned, the certificate covered Raynaud bond, both in its fabricated form in rivet and in its fabricated form as cassette?
the certificate would cover, the material could be used either as face fixed or riveted, and both were considered suitable. So in other words, the material could be used to any of these two configurations.
And the certificate covered the product in use in those two situations?
Yes, yes.
Yes, so you agree then, I think, that the reader of the certificate would expect that any technical claim made in the certificate would apply equally to the panel fabricated into a cassette as to the panel fabricated into a rivet?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So can we agree that when the certificate says product or uses the word product, it means product in both forms of fixing system, as opposed to the subframe and the other fixing?
Again, the product has got certain fire resistance properties which were covered. Yeah. But all this is saying is that both fixing methods were suitable as regards the material use.
Yes, I understand. Can we then stick with your statement and go back to the question I showed you you'd answered a second or two ago on the previous page, please? I read it out, but I skipped over it. Question 7A, what products did the certificate cover? In particular, please address the variants core type, standard PE, or fire retardant. And your answer is at paragraph 23, if we just go to that, on page, at the top of page 5, you see it says samples of the product covered are described in section 6.1 and 6.2 of the certificate. And also, let's cover these off while we can. If you look at C, coating type, Duragloss PE, PVDF FR, and coating color, grey-green PE, metallic grey FR. So that's what you say in your statement. Let's look at the statement in the certificate itself now, please. Can we go back to the certificate, BBA 6047, and look, please, at page 2. The blue header at the top says regulations, as we can see there. And it says, in the opinion of the BBA, Reynobond architectural wall cladding panels, if used in accordance with the provisions of this certificate, will meet or contribute to meeting the relevant requirements of the following building regulations. And then if you go down to the second item down, B4 bracket 1, do you see? External fire spread. Can you see that?
Yes.
It says under comment, or next to comment, the panels are judged to meet the class 0 requirements. See sections 6.1 to 6.6 of this certificate. Now, first, do you remember who drafted or formulated those words? The panels are judged to meet the class 0 requirements.
I think this was standard format of expressing classification of products.
Right. So is that an example of you, as it were, cutting and pasting or copying across?
Yes, yes, I think so, yes.
So just to be crystal clear, this isn't a form of words that had come from Brian Haynes or perhaps suggested by Sarah Colwell? No,
it's something that I would put forward for comment to the appropriate department.
Yes, I see. Now let's go to page 5, please, and let's look in detail at section 6. I'll read to you sections 6.1 to 6.3 to start with. In fact, probably best to read the whole thing. Forgive me, this may take a moment or two, but it's important that you see the whole thing, I think. It's under the rubric behavior in relation to fire. And it says, a standard sample of the product with a grey-green Duragloss 5000 coating, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification of B S2D0 in accordance with EN 13501 Part 1 2002. A fire retardant sample of the product with a gold-coloured Duragloss finish, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification BS1D0 in accordance with EN 13501 2002. A fire retardant sample of the product with a metallic grey PVDF finish, when tested in accordance with BS 476 Part 6 1989, achieved a fire propagation index I of 0, and when tested in accordance with BS 476 Part 7 1997, achieved a Class 1 surface spread of flame. And then 6.3 says, as a consequence of section 6.1 and 6.2, the products may be regarded as having a Class 0 surface in relation to the approved document B of the building regulations, etc., and a low risk material as defined in the Building Scotland regulations. The unexposed side of the products may also be regarded as having a Class 0 surface. And then 6.4 says these performances may not be achieved by other colours of the product, and the designations of a particular colour should be confirmed by, and then it sets out various tests in various different subordinate jurisdictions. And then 6.5, for resistance to fire, the performance of a wall incorporating the product can only be determined by tests from a suitably accredited laboratory and is not covered by this certificate. And then 6.6, cavity barriers should be incorporated behind the cladding as required by the national building regulations, but should not block essential ventilation pathways. Particular attention should be paid to preventing the spread of fire from within a building, breaching the cladding system through window and door openings. Now, I just want to look at some of those statements. I've read to you the entirety of section 6 so that you have it in your mind. Can we start with the statement at section 6.2, please? A fire retardant sample of the product with a metallic grey PVDF finish. Can we go to page 163 of the technical file? That's BBA 408042, page 163. This is the Warrington Fire Test Report number 132316, as you can see, done under Part 7 of BS 476. And if we look at the second page of that report at page 165, you can see paragraph 3, there's a description of the test specimens there. And in the second paragraph, it says the product was Reynobond 55 FR, color reference RAL 9006 metallic gray, a composite coated aluminium panel having an overall thickness of 4 millimeters, comprising a 3 millimeter thick fire retardant core. If you skip to the next paragraph, the decorative test face aluminium sheet was coated on the exposed face with a 5 micron thick epoxy primer and a 20 micron thick PVDF coating. If you look at the next page of this report at page 167, there are blank pages in between, I'm afraid. At the very bottom of page 167, you see the test results and classification, and in the capitals in bold at the bottom of the page, it says this: in accordance with the class definitions given in BS 476 Part 7, 1997, the specimens tested are classified as Class 1. Now, if we go on to page 169, this is the second issue of this report, and it's dated the 12th of September 2003, as you can see. And if we look at the test that goes with it, this is the Part 6 test. This is in the technical file at page 177. And we can see that it's a Warrington Fire Test Report number 132317, this time under Part 6 of BS 476. If you go down to page 179, paragraph 3, you can see, again, the description. It's in the same format. Second paragraph, the product was Reynobond 55 FR, color reference RAL 9006 metallic gray, etc. And the same decorative again. And it says again, it comprises a 3 millimeter thick fire retardant core. So this is the test on the same product as the one we were just looking at, but done under Part 6. And we have the test results at page 181. And at the bottom of that page, we can see the test results there. And there they are, set out. And for completeness, we can go to page 183 and see the date of issue, 12th of September 2003. Now those are the FR tests from 2003 done under BS 476 parts 6 and 7. Can we now go back, please, to page 5 of the BBA certificate, BBA 6 areas 47, and look again at section 6.2. And it says there, I've read it before, I'll just show it to you again, a fire retardant sample of a product with a metallic grey PVDF finish, when tested in accordance with BS 476 part 6, 1989 achieved a fire propagation index, capital I of 0, and when tested in accordance with BS 476 part 7, 1997 achieved a class 1 surface spread of flame. Is it right that the two tests I've just taken you through quite quickly are tests of the specimen mentioned in section 6.2 of the BBA certificate?
Again, I'm not familiar with the. I'm guessing at some stage the fire expert would have looked at this, but it really I can't go into detail as regards the statements. I think whatever we have said in paragraph 6.2 must have been a statement of fact.
Yes.
That's all I can say.
Sorry, do you want to continue? I'm so sorry, I overspoke across you. Do you want to say something more? Have you finished your answer?
I suggest you carry on, Mr. Millett.
Right. Mr. Gregorian, we've seen no summary reports stating that these two tests amount to a class 0 result. Do you know why that is?
No, I have no knowledge of, as I've mentioned before, I would rely on the assessment by fire experts.
Right. Was it your, and maybe you can't help with this in the light of that answer, but was it your experience at the time, late 2007, that there would normally be a summary report which would consider the test data that I've just shown you and say whether the material met the requirements of class 0?
Sorry, if there's a summary report.
Would it be normal for there to be, in your experience at the time, a summary report saying class 0 as a result of these tests?
I can't remember. I can't remember.
Do you remember whether you or somebody else, anybody, looked at the data from these two FR test reports and decide that they met the criteria for class 0?
Yes, as I say, a fire expert would have looked at this document and come to this conclusion, and we would include it in the certificate as appropriate.
And you would have understood, would you, at the time, that these results together amounted to achieving a class 0 result?
I wouldn't know about that. I don't know how the assessments are done. I would just include the appropriate statement.
Right.
And make sure that the technical manager would also approve the statement.
Yes. And again, bearing in mind your last answer, at least looking at the scheme of section 6, were you clear in your mind at the time that section 6.2 and the results identified in it only applied to Raynaud bond with an FR core and not to Raynaud bond with a PE core?
That's what the statement seems to suggest, yes.
Were you clear in your mind that that's what it meant?
I would take this as relevant to fire retardant sample of the product. Yes, that's all I can conclude. This is a statement of fact.
Yeah,
that's all it is.
Did you know at the time? Well, let me ask it this way: did you have any understanding at the time about whether Raynaud bond 55 with a PE core had been tested under BS 476 parts 6 and 7?
I can't remember.
Did you understand at the time that the statements in paragraph 6.2 did not apply to Reynabond 55 with a PE core?
Again, this is a detail that I can't comment on.
Let's then look at section 6.1, just above it. And again, I've read this to you, but I'll just read you the precise words again. A standard sample of the product with a grey-green Duragloss 5000 coating, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification of B S2D0 in accordance with EN 13501 Part 1 2002. A fire retardant sample of the product with a gold-coloured Duragloss finish, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification of BS1D0 in accordance with EN 13501 2002. Did you understand at the time, or intend by the wording, that standard sample referred to Reynabond with a PE core?
No, I have no. The details are quite alien to me, to be honest.
When you say that, did you not draft this part of the report, or did somebody else draft this part of the certificate?
I would put it in this format, but the actual classifications and so on don't mean very much to me.
Did you not understand that when you were writing a standard sample of the product, even as a formula from another document, you were referring to the non-FR standard PE version of the product?
That's right. That's what the statement seems to suggest, yes.
You say it seems to suggest that. I'm just trying to get inside your mind at the time this document was produced. When you wrote a standard sample of the product, did you understand that you were referring to the PE core as opposed to the FR core?
Yes.
Yes. Can we look at the technical file, please, at page 147? BBA 408042 at page 47. This is what we've called test 5A, or classification 5A. And just looking at it with me, it's a reaction to fire classification report number RA050005A under 13501 Part 1. And it's at the bottom of the page, you can see that it's dated issue 7th of January 2005. And just a little above that, the commercial brand is Reynabond 55 PE riveted system. You see that. And if you go to page 149, please, you can see that there's a product description under paragraph 2 on that page, and you can see that it's described as a composite panel consisting of a low density polyethylene core thermally bonded using a 70 micron thick polyethylene film between two pre-coated aluminium sheets, tested system riveted on metallic substructure. And then underneath that, at the bottom of the next block of text, it says finishing coat Duragloss 5000, color grey-green. And then if we go down to page 153, we can see the classification BS2D0. And below that, you can see there's a date, 7th of January 2005. The signatures at the bottom from the CSTB. But a little bit above that, under field of application, you can see it says this classification is valid for the following product parameters. And then the second bullet point there says only for the system riveted on any metallic substructure. Now, my first question is this document familiar to you?
I must have looked at it at some stage, but I can't remember the details.
Right. Okay. It was on the technical file, and we know from other evidence we'll come to that you were sent it by Arconic in 2007. So I'm going to assume you were familiar with it. Can we go back then to section 6.1 of the BBA certificate at page 5 of that document, BBA 6047. And can we have that up on the screen at the same time as test 5A, classification 5A? Just put the two up together. That's BBA 8042 at page 147. You can just have that, please, at the same time. BBA, yes, thank you very much. Just looking at those side by side, does the certificate at section 6.1 record classification 5A? Let me see if I can help. If you go to page 153, as I showed you, it's where you've got the actual classification in there. And I appreciate this is a long time ago, so you need to see the documents. You can see the classification report 5A has the classification B S2 D0.
Yes.
Cast your eye to the left-hand side of the screen under 6.1, you can see it says that the standard sample of the product, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification of B S2 D0.
Yeah.
The N13501. Looking at those two documents now together, can you confirm that the certificate, tell us that at section 6.1, the reference to the classification there is a reference to this classification in this classification report?
Yes, I can confirm that, yes.
Yes. And that pertains, doesn't it, to PE called Raynaud bond, yes?
Yes.
In riveted system and only in riveted system, yes?
Again, this was a document provided by CSTB. So that is how they would assess fire performance.
Yeah. Yes. My question was that it pertains not only to PE called Raynaud bond, but to the riveted, but to PE Raynaud bond in the riveted system. Yes.
Yes. But as far as our assessment was concerned, it's quite immaterial or irrelevant how the fixing was done. As far as BBA was concerned, it was the product we were assessing. So whether it's riveted or cassette fixed was to some extent irrelevant.
Well, I'd like to come back to that answer in a few moments if I can. Can I just back up a little bit and let's see together, because it will help your recollection, I think, how you came to see this document. Can we go, please, to MET 30/53158 _ P15 at page 90. This is an exhibit to Mr. Verler's statement. And this is an email from you to Mr. Verler on the 15th of May 2007. And you tell him that good progress is being made in relation to the assessment, but you need further information. And you set out 4 paragraphs there. The first one says, reaction to fire test data for the standard PE panel. If not available, you'll need to arrange for the tests to be done. As for the FR product, please note that the French classification as described in the AVI technique is not recognized in the UK. Fire test reports for the FR product already submitted with your application. And then if you look up the screen, you can see that he sends you on the 25th of May 2007 the classification report 5A, and we take it from me that that is what he sends you. Hello, Hamo, please find enclosed the fire reaction certificate for our product Raynaud bond PE. And then if you look a little bit above that, please, if you go to page 96, I think you'll need, you go back to him, page 96, and you say in response to him, also on the same day, 25th of May, Claude, the document is acceptable. Thank you. I look forward to receiving your response to items 2, 3, and 4 of my email below. So you asked him for the test data for PE, and he sent you classification report 5A that I've shown you. When he sent it to you, did you study it?
Again, not having enough knowledge, there was no point in me. All I was interested in was the classification. I couldn't study it in detail.
Right.
I would just look at the classification.
So when you told him that the document was acceptable, acceptable for what?
Acceptable for our purposes.
Which were?
Which were to assess the fire performance of the product.
I see. Did you notice, if we go back to page 153, please, of the technical file, I showed you this, but I want to show it to you again. That's BBA 408042, page 153. This is under the field of application. Did you notice that it said only for the system riveted on any metallic substructure?
Yeah.
You did?
Yes.
Did that tell you that the fire classification result contained in classification report 5A that Mr. Verlet had sent you at your request was valid only for Raynaud bond that was 4 millimeters thick and for the riveted variant?
Again, I must have discussed this with somebody, most probably Brian Haynes, to see whether the data supplied was sufficient for our purposes. Let's say, other than that, I couldn't do any assessment at all. I mean,
did you notice that the fire classification report he was sending you applied only to rivet?
Yes, but as I say, because we're assessing the product, the fact that it's riveted, I thought was immaterial, was irrelevant.
Well, you say that. Did you ask let's take that in stages. Did you ask yourself how, if the classification report Mr. Verlet had sent you only covered the rivet system, how it could apply validly to the cassette system?
That is all the information we had from CSTB. So,
going back to section 6.1 of the certificate, please. BBA 6047, page 5. You can see what's said there. I've read it to you now twice. You can see it doesn't refer to the fact that classification 5A was of the rivet system only. Cutting to the heart of the point, the question is, why not? Why doesn't it say?
Sorry, which paragraph is that?
6.1.
6.1, yeah.
You say a standard sample of the product achieved a classification of BS2D0. The question is, why doesn't it say a standard sample of the product in rivet fixing?
Again, because it was, as far as the fire performance was concerned, it was irrelevant in what context it was just the actual surface, the spread of flame, I believe these things refer to, and it was irrelevant how they were fixed. The information we got from CSTB was a riveted one, but I believe maybe as a result of my discussion with Brian, we decided that's suitable irrespective of the fixing methods.
Given that the CSTB had provided test data on the product in riveted form and to be used only in that fabrication, why did you consider that drawing the distinction between rivet and cassette in this subsection of the certificate was irrelevant? Because
we were covering the panel material, not the fixing method. And with regard to resistance to fire, I would suggest it would have been irrelevant as to what fixing method was used.
Well, that may be true in relation to resistance to fire, but of course this is about reaction to fire, isn't it?
Again, that shows my ignorance of this particular subject. I have very little knowledge of fire issues.
Right. Regardless of the amount of knowledge you had, could you not see that the test data you were being sent related only to the product in rivet form? And therefore, any claim for fire performance that you could make in the certificate had to relate to the product in rivet form, and not generally. No,
as I say, I must have discussed this with somebody, with a fire expert possibly. And as I say, it was just the material we were covering. And I must have felt the fixing method was irrelevant.
You knew at the time you drafted this certificate that there were two fixing methods, because they're clearly spelt out in the certificate, aren't they? Fixing and cassette. Yes? Yes. You nodded, but you say yes. Yes. Why there? Did you therefore realize that there should also have been an equivalent test and classification report for the cassette fixing system?
I think the BBA certificate makes it clear that the fact that we've included some details as to how it could be fixed to a substructure is just to show what the product can be used, in what context it could be used, nothing more.
Did you discuss with a fire expert whether you could safely ignore the distinction between rivet and cassette when identifying the standard samples fire performance, as you do in section 6.1?
I can't remember any conversation with regard to advice from a fire expert, but I must have discussed it with Brian. I didn't make the decision that the fixing method was relevant with regard to fire performance.
Who did?
I can't remember. I mean, I must have been advised by somebody that it's the data that CSTB is supplied could be used to assess the panel product on its own,
without distinguishing between rivet and cassette.
That's right.
And you say I must have been advised by somebody. Can you tell us who that would have been?
I can't, to be honest. I mean, as I mentioned, I've got very little knowledge of fire issues, and I must have consulted with somebody, and they must have thought, yes, we could use this data to assess the panel product.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, Mr. Millett, I think it is. We're going to take a break now, Mr. Gregorian, so we can all get some lunch, you included. We'll come back, please, at 2 o'clock. And during the break, please take care not to discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else.
Certainly.
Right. Good. Thank you very much.
Yep.
See you at 2 o'clock then.
Yep.
Thank you.